Technically, a speedrun doesn't begin when the timer starts, but rather with figuring out how to do it. Speedruns take time to learn, time which can range anywhere from a few minutes to a few months. It depends on, among other things, the length and complexity of the game, and how quickly the player can not only learn the techniques involved, but pull them off smoothly and consistently. That being said, not every run sees the light of day. And in my case, I spent about 12 hours learning a run, only to never actually do it. On Twitch, there's a stream tag called 12-Hour Challenge. This is not about streaming for 12 hours straight, because leaving OBS running for 12 hours is not a challenge. The 12-Hour Challenge is a speedrun challenge that occurs twice a year, and is typically organized by prominent former runner Golden. The challenge is to spend 12 hours learning a new speedrun for a new game, either spending the whole 12 hours practicing, or practicing and performing the first run within the 12-hour stretch. This challenge was where I learned to run Jet Grind Radio and Streets of Fury EX, the latter of which I would eventually perform at a marathon. One year, however, I decided I wanted to do the challenge by learning one of my all-time favorite games, Super Metroid. Specifically, Super Metroid Any Percent, the most widely run category. This involves defeating all the major bosses and not using any major glitches. However, the amount of tech involved in the game can be overwhelming. Going by the Super Metroid speedrunning wiki, there are roughly 14 techniques for weapon use and 23 movement techniques, as well as a massive list of movement and attack patterns to optimize the time spent in individual rooms throughout the run. Obviously, I wasn't going to try and learn absolutely everything, but the games I'd run before were, for the most part, fairly simple from a speed tech standpoint. And while it's not necessary to learn all of those techniques to finish a run, it's still quite the hill to climb. Therefore, my goal for the 12-hour challenge was to simply make it to the end of the game. The rules for the 12-hour challenge can be pretty loose, so the 12 hours could actually be broken up across multiple streams and go over or under the 12-hour mark. Due to my personal and work schedule, I wound up streaming 2 hours 47 minutes the first day, 1 hour 38 minutes the next day, 5 hours 5 minutes the next, and 1 hour 20 minutes the final day for a total of roughly 11 hours. However, things were going wrong before the run even started. I have an original SNES controller, which is the same one I've used since my family got the SNES in the early 90s. This controller's select button only works about half the time it's pressed. In other games I run and casual play, this wasn't an issue, but in Super Metroid, it's the button for cycling between weapons. I would try swapping to a third-party controller in the streams to fix this, but I could never adjust to it. And instead, I mapped item select to Y, which would ordinarily cancel out whatever item was selected, meaning I had to completely cycle through the weapons every time I used one. Still, this had no effect in the early parts of the run, like escaping the station, landing on Zebes, and basically any point up to when I got more than 2 weapons. I learned Moonfall, a trick for dropping long distances while surpassing the game's speed cap after a few tries. Getting back up this shaft was a struggle though. It's almost all wall jumping, which is a mechanic you're supposed to use even in casual play at times, but I've always been bad at it. Considering wall jumping is used early and often throughout the run, including off the sides of platforms or with rather precise timing and enemy cycles, I had a lot of rooms where I would get stuck for minutes at a time or spend a lot of time practicing. It only got tougher when doing things like performing a series of wall jumps into a narrow tunnel and entering morph ball form at just the right time, a trick known as Alcatraz Escape. My insistence on doing some of these tricks twice only made it take even longer. Then came the tunnel where I had to perform a mock ball. Mock ball is a technique that allows Samus to keep her speed and avoid bouncing while switching to the morph ball in midair. Normally she will bounce on the ground and her momentum resets, but by executing a mock ball here, runners outrun the breakaway blocks, sneak under these gates, and get super missiles early, bypassing the Spore Spawn boss entirely. I actually got the hang of this pretty quickly, and it gave me a bit of a confidence boost, which wouldn't last particularly long. After grabbing missiles and the charge beam and running through some rooms, I came upon a vertical shaft in Red Brinstar. And this is where I made my biggest mistake in trying to learn this run. There are two primary routes for Super Metroid Any %, known as KPDR and PRKD. The letters represent the main bosses, Kraid, Phantoon, Dragon, and Ridley, as well as the order they're fought in. The PRKD route is faster by about 2 minutes real time, but its difficulty is much, much higher. Roughly equivalent to the low % category, where only about 14% of all items are collected. This is why it's not uncommon to see very skilled, very experienced runners for this route lose their runs, such as the 1 GDQ marathon where 3 out of the 4 runners did not finish. This hallway is where the two routes go in very different directions. A KPDR run would drop down this shaft, but the PRKD route involves wall jumping up this shaft, then stopping to fire a charge shot to hit some breakaway blocks at the top, then wall jumping in such a way as to avoid all the enemies and make it through the gap in the blocks before they reappear. I struggled to pull this off for over half an hour, having to refill health in another room over and over before finally making it to the top of the shaft. After nearly dying trying to pull off some damage boosts, and eventually pulling off the damage boost before acquiring the power bomb, I got to another major sticking point. There's an area called the Moat, which you're not supposed to be able to cross until getting the grapple beam. However, this gap can be cleared by performing something called a continuous wall jump, which involves running through the door, jumping just before Samus falls in the water, and ideally collecting the missile, barely clearing the pedestal it sits on, and wall jumping off the edge of said pedestal to get to the door on the other side. Both jumps are incredibly precise, and I got stuck here for an hour and 40 minutes. But then... Oh! Fucking done! What now, Phantoon? Shit, where did my controller go? Okay, found it. After performing the continuous wall jump a second time, as well as a series of precise jumps to skip more grapple beam blocks, I was inside the wrecked ship. I was hitting the occasional save point to avoid having to redo too much between deaths, but the thing about the wrecked ship is none of the save points are accessible until after beating Phantoon. And seeing as how I wasn't familiar with the quick kill for this boss, I died in the Phantoon fight 10 times, meaning I had to do the continuous wall jump and the grapple block skips again another 10 times. I never did get the quick kill setup, but with some incredibly cautious play, after another hour of play, I did eventually beat Phantoon and move on. To give a frame of reference, this is about the 1/4 mark of the run. Good Super Metroid speedrunners can reach this point of the route in about 11 minutes. I'd been playing for about 4.5 hours. One floor clip later, I tanked my way through the bowling alley and grabbed the gravity suit, then made a trip through Red Brinstar to get the Spazer and descended into Norfair. I was streaming all of this on Twitch, and by this point a couple people familiar with Super Metroid showed up in the Twitch chat and said that it was highly recommended to not follow this route until becoming much more comfortable with running the game on the simpler route. But still, I pressed on. Following another mock ball under some gates and another in the opposite direction, I reached the entrance to Lower Norfair and another major roadblock. The most commonly used and optimal method to get to the normally out-of-reach entrance is to do a lava spark, which involves getting a shine spark in a shorter distance than usual with a series of button taps, called short charging, then executing a damage boost and a vertical shine spark to reach the entrance. After not getting the short charge to work for several minutes, I switched to another strategy, the gravity jump. This involves jumping as the screen transitions to the map and taking off the gravity suit, which causes Samus to take a lot of damage but also maintain the gravity suit's jump speed while having the low deceleration of her regular suit, letting her quote-unquote float up to the entrance. And I managed to do that after about 5 tries.
I got it! Shit. My confidence is still very low, but it's slightly higher than basement level after that.
However, this led to another area where the options were either perform a short charge or use up power bombs and take damage. After not getting short charges to work for another few minutes, I used power bombs and took some damage. What immediately follows this is what Super Metroid runners call the worst room in the game. Seriously, that's the name listed on the Speedruns wiki. For me, this meant killing the space pirates, wall jumping up to perform a mid-air power bomb, then doing a pretty precise series of wall jumps to get through the gap the bomb opened up, and not subsequently dying the rest of the way up. I'll take doing the worst room in the game over several times compared to what came after it. The Ridley Fight. When I first reached Ridley, I'd used up about 7 of the 12 hours in the challenge. And by the time I beat Ridley, another 3 hours had passed. The Ridley Fight involves a lot of manipulation of his attack patterns to get into favorable positions. But it also involves a lot of charge shots due to the low amount of missiles and super missiles, and baiting him into grabbing Samus when he reaches 0 hit points. I don't want to use the words trial by fire for this fight because that's a terrible pun even by my standards, but I don't know how else to describe what it felt like to just die against Ridley over and over and over while trying to understand how everything worked. I don't even remember trying and failing the quick kill of Raid after this, because as I hit the save point near Meridia, one thing became painfully apparent. I wasn't enjoying this. At all. A speedrun I wanted to learn for a game I love was something that I would give up after sinking nearly half a day's worth of time into it. Perhaps someday I'll go back to this game and the any % route while following the recommended KPDR path. You know, once I've given enough time for how I felt about this game and this particular challenge to blow over. This isn't the only game I like that I've tried to run but ultimately didn't do any runs for. But it is the game that I use to establish a rule. If I'm trying to run a game I like and I realize I'm just not enjoying myself, I stop. No ifs, ands, or buts, I just stop. Because for me at least, my enjoyment from video games is still a higher priority than my enjoyment from speedrunning video games.